Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the second session of FCF's Spring 2025 webinar series. Today we'll be talking about the impact of volunteer stewardship on urban forests. So today we'll be talking about a brief introduction of FCF. And then we'll go into why does FCF put stewardship at the forefront of our organization and mission? What interventions do we make with volunteers in terms of stewardship and maintaining the sites that we plant? We'll go into tracking performance and activities, and then current survival rates and our target goals. So first of all, just a personal introduction. So I've been with FCF since spring 2022, so it's been a few years now. I graduated from the University of Guelph, before that in environmental science, and I've previous experience tree planting in Northern Ontario and BC. So it's interesting to see some of the differences between tree planting for like reforestation and logging companies versus what we're doing with FCF. So primarily with that, it's reforestation. You're replanting trees that in an area that has just been cut. But what we do is afforestation is a little different, where we're planting trees in spaces that haven't had trees in a very long time. So my role with FCF is field and data lead. So I'm out there helping with all the planting events and all the stewardship activities. So go in after the trees have been planted and checking up on them, doing a lot of monitoring and helping with those tree care events. Another part of my role is reporting. So we do collect a lot of data and collect a lot of observations on our projects. And then we do want to report our findings and any outcomes we do with the public. So we'll share all of our findings on our website through webinars like this and through various other channels. So next, about our organization. So our mission is growing Ottawa's urban forest to mitigate climate change, enhance biodiversity, and build a greener and more resilient community. And we do that through strategic tree planting, long-term stewardship, community engagement, and impact evaluation. So I think what FCF we fill a specific niche, and that is providing long-term stewardship and maintenance with communities. So I find that not many other groups in the Ottawa region do this, and this is a primary program that we offer with FCF. Another thing I wanted to emphasize was continual learning. As an organization, we want to improve our methods, and we're always assessing our methods and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and essentially evaluating the impact of that and trying to make the best decisions moving forward to achieve our goals. So our projects, we are a tree planting organization, but we do much more than just plant trees. I mean, the main part of our mission is tree planting, and we do have a lot of those standard projects you see in green spaces around the city, where a lot of trees are planted 6 to 7 feet apart in a big open green space. So we do specialize in that. Another type of afforestation that we work in are planting Miyawaki tiny forests. So it's an afforestation method that's a little different. and it utilizes or follows the Miyawaki method of afforestation. And that method is specialized for urban spaces and especially small spaces. So thus far, we've planted 13 of those in Ottawa, and we're a leader in tiny forests in this region. We do have our base of operations located at the Just Food Community Farm in Blackburn Hamlet. And over there, we have a lot of our experimentation. We're experimenting with different afforestation projects, seeing what works and what doesn't work. And at that site, we do have a community food forest and a walking path that goes through it. We have about 20 signs along this path. So it's self-guided and it's open to the public, so you could go and walk through it anytime you like. In addition to that, we have lots of educational workshops. Spring is a good time for a pruning workshop that we host every year at our base of operations. And we also offer edible landscape workshops as well. And then lastly, expanding our base of operations. So in addition to having those afforestation experiments there, we are building our tree nursery. So like many other planting organizations, we're noticing a little bottleneck of high demand of trees, and we're not able at nurseries, and we're not able to procure all the trees and seeds that we're looking to plant. So we're actually starting our own seed collection team to collect our own seed and then build out our nursery with that. So a little more on projects and what we've done so far is actually quite a lot. In just 4 years, we've planted over 10,000 plants thus far. So that includes trees, shrubs, and forbs. And just in 2024, we've surpassed the 5,000 mark for the first time. 2024 marked a very special year for FCF, being that we've increased our the amount of trees, shrubs, and forbs we've planted by 30% since 2023. So you see that on this chart here in the bottom right. Another thing that I want to emphasize is our commitment to biodiversity. So it's stated in our mission, but I really want to highlight these charts here. So in the pie chart on the top left, you'll notice that we have a huge diversity in the species that we plant. So in just trees and shrubs alone, we've planted 101 native species. And then you'll see on the bubble chart, here's some of the most common species we've planted. So it's a lot of silver maple, American basswood, common hackberry for trees, and for shrubs, we plant a lot of red Osier dogwood and black chokeberry. So that's a little bit about FCF. Actually, before we get into the next slide, we do have a ton of different visualizations of our growth and all the projects that we've planted. And a good site to see all of that data and all the growth of our organization is through Tableau. So I think, Leanne, if you could add in a link to our Tableau account, that'd be great if you could add that to the chat.
Yeah, it's in the chat now.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, so why does FCF put stewardship at the forefront? Well, simply put, it increases the long-term success of our planting projects. So urban areas are notorious, or urban forests are notorious for having a low survival rate. And it's not uncommon to see survival rates of planted trees be as low as 30 to 40%, which is a shame. There are many challenges for planting trees in urban areas. There's much higher levels of pollution, air pollution, and in Ottawa we use a ton of road salt, so it may be good for road safety, but sure is not good for planted trees. And then we're seeing excess levels of drought and increased temperatures, so that's posing a real challenge to keeping trees watered and moist. A risk of disease and heightened exposure to pests and invasive species. So those are just a few of the main challenges that trees face in urban areas, and it is vital for us to address those issues and steward them so that our trees reach maturity. I like to say that when you buy a tree for your lawn or for your backyard, you usually buy it from a tree nursery. And those trees come with a little care card. So why should we treat mass plantings of smaller trees in urban areas any different? Those trees need stewardship just like the ones that are being planted in your front lawn or backyard. So I mentioned earlier that stewardship ensures long-term project success. But what does success look like, and how do we measure that? We do that through two things, and it's mainly looking at survival rates and assessing the tree health and overall vigor of these trees that are being planted. So there are so many benefits to active stewardship, and most of them come from an increased survival rate. So when you get increased survival rates, you get a greater impact from these tree planting projects. More trees are staying in the ground and overall having a higher environmental impact. So improved air quality and improved local biodiversity. Furthermore, they'll enhance those urban green spaces in our community. Another thing I wanted to point out as one of the main benefits is community engagement and ownership. So I mentioned this before, but something that sets us apart is that we offer many opportunities to engage with the community, and that could be as early as planting the trees. So we do have events where we have the local community come and help us plant. And then they stick with us, and we offer or we host tree care events with volunteers. So you could be a part of planting the trees, but also coming back and monitoring and maintaining those trees for years after they've been planted. So by being around these trees and maintaining them, we're fostering a sense of ownership and connection with these urban forests. And that connection again will lead to even more or more care and more maintenance of these trees. So it's kind of like a positive feedback loop for beneficial impacts for the community and the trees. And lastly, if you're spending more time with the trees, you're spending more time outside. So there's undeniable health benefits from being with these urban forests. So how do we incorporate stewardship into our afforestation model? So we're guided by a model that has 4 phases that are centered around adaptive management. So the first, launch and learn, surviving and thriving, free to grow, and assess and adjust. So these 4 phases roughly follow the life cycle of a planting project. So the first, launch and learn. So each new site has unique conditions that we're planting in. So that could be soil conditions, proximity to water, how high the water table is, looking at nearby plant species and looking for signs of animal species in the area. And again, looking at competing vegetation in this site. So those are a lot of unique conditions that we're looking at before an area is planted. So this step happens before that. It's as early as a year before the planting, but we usually do it a few months to half a year before the planting is planned. So for planning a planting project in the spring, we usually go out the fall before that to look at everything we need, to look at all the site conditions. And if we're planning to plant the trees in the fall, then we'll do that in the spring. So we're looking at creating a plan that would adapt our strategies to best plant the trees and care for them, so, to meet all the conditions of the site. And then one thing I wanted to point out was how this, in this phase, we want to inform all the community members and landowners with up-to-date information. So that's updating them with the unique site conditions and plans for planting and plans for maintaining the site. So this is very important to us. A lot of our sites are located on National Capital Commission land around Ottawa, and it's making them aware of what we find at the site and what we plan to do to ensure a high survival rate is critical, and it fosters a great relationship with them and facilitates high project success. The next phase is surviving and thriving. So this happens after the trees have been planted and lasts for 3 to 5 years after. This is where most of the tree care and maintenance occurs, and focuses on monitoring and maintenance at reduced intervals. So as the trees grow up, we're hoping that the amount of site visits or tree care events required will be reduced as they naturally grow. The aim is for trees to grow. So we want to ensure that trees reach performance and optimal growth indicators. So we regularly go into the sites along with volunteers, and we want to track the success and the conditions of the sites through audits and inventories. So this will guide any new maintenance strategies or assess whether current practices are working. An example would be if we plant a site and we are regularly weeding and noticed that the trees are still being hurt or affected by all the weeds, we will go in and we'll try and devise a different method or an additional method to help suppress some of the weeds. So this goes along with the continual learning aspect. And then the third stage is free to grow. So this is like our target. We want all of our planting projects to reach this phase. And this is where all of the trees surpass the competing vegetation height. So they're not competing with anything. They're the prime plants in the area and cannot be inhibited by anything else. At this stage, monitoring and maintenance are greatly reduced as they are pretty much established. We don't need to go in and water or weed. The only thing that we may need to do is place tree guards on trees if they need to, and remove them again at the end of winter. And so this marks the transition of a self-sustaining forest and kind of where we'll leave those trees to grow. And then the last phase, assess and adjust. This phase kind of encompasses everything throughout. It encompasses all the other phases and happens throughout the entire life cycle of a planting project. We continuously assess the impact of our methods, whether it be how we procure trees or grow trees. So we procure many trees in pots, just regular standard pots, or we could procure them in a special new pot, for example, an air pruning pot. And with those new air pruning pots, they tend to grow stronger root balls. So measuring how well those different pots work and seeing if that has an effect on project success. So seeing if that has an effect on survival rates. And we'll look at a lot of these factors throughout the life cycle of the tree. So that example was before the trees were planted. We'll look at methods that we use while the tree is planted. And then again, methods of stewardship. How do we measure the impact of all these interventions that we're providing for stewardship? So an example for that would be, a great example for continual learning would be animal pressure. So the most basic intervention we can do for that is placing tree guards on trees. That will prevent rodents, rabbits from chewing at the bark over winter. And then, so if we go in and we notice that, hey, there's actually a lot of deer browsing, all of the deer have eaten the buds and the tops of all of our maple trees, then we'll consider further interventions in the form of fencing, which totally prevents any deer from going into the site. Or if that's not possible, we could spray a deer and rabbit repellent on all the trees. So it's a nasty concoction of coyote urine, so that will deter the deer. So understanding the effects of all these interventions is very important. If you're interested in looking at our afforestation model and our afforestation master plan a little further, I think, Leanne, if you could put the link to that in the chat, that would be super helpful. But then it's also available on our website. So next, the role of volunteers in stewardship. So how do volunteers work in that model, work in all those phases? So there's three main ways that volunteers can help us, and it's participating in tree care events led by staff, and it's also visiting on your own sites. Visiting the sites on your own time and submit a tree care report or citizen science report to show us what you've observed. So I'll get into that in a little bit. And then the last thing is learning new skills. So attending workshops that we offer and engage with FCF, participate in planting events and participating in tree care events. You'll learn a lot. And while you do that, you could participate in the Forest Stewardship Service. So you'll build up your skills, and then you could understand how how to plant and maintain trees. So I have a pop quiz for everyone. What species of tree do you see in this photo? So in the foreground, not looking for this one in the back. So you could pop your answers in the chat, and then we'll see what everyone has to say. Or you could, yeah, field binweed. That's a good answer. Yeah, looks like a stump covered by a vine. Yes, so it's a white spruce under there. Yeah, both of you mentioned that you see the vines. It looks like a stump that's covered. So who would have guessed that there would be a white spruce under there? I wouldn't have, that's for sure. I mean, if you can't tell what the tree is, how do you expect, if you can't see it, how do you expect it to grow and to thrive in this environment? So this tree was actually uncovered by a volunteer during a tree care event last August. This is just one example of many that were taken at this site, that were taken over by carpets of vines. So I want to emphasize that if we did not go in and remove the vines and perform tree care, that tree and others just like it at that site would have died. So I want to emphasize that all of the stewardship work that we're doing is having a positive impact on the trees. So what interventions do we make? This encompasses all the different factors that we'll consider when providing stewardship. So mulching is super important, and we do that at all of our sites. Place mulch around the base of all of our trees, and that improves soil moisture retention. Watering, our spring and summers are becoming hotter and drier, and watering is becoming much more critical for newly planted trees. Weeding, we need to reduce the competing vegetation around these trees. We want to prevent those trees from becoming stunted. And eventually, if there are vines in the area, strangling and restricting the growth. So that's something that we want to do, and we do quite often at that particular site. Invasive species control. So we want to, similar to weeding, that will remove some invasive species in the area along with weeding. Stock type. So selecting the proper stock for the planting stock for that site and its conditions. So that's in the form of planting tree species that have adapted for that specific condition. So if we're planting in a fairly wet area close to a creek, then we'll plant a lot of flood-prone species. Whereas if we're planting a site that has very sandy soil, then we'll shift the species towards pine that can grow fairly easily in those soils. Planting quality and specifications. So depending on some soil conditions, we'll want to modify how we plant the trees. So at our base of operations, the soil there is very heavy clay. And for those food forests, we want to plant apple trees, pear, and peach, which don't necessarily like growing in really tough clay. So we'll modify our planting method to, instead of dig in the clay and plant them directly in there, we'll set the root ball on top of the clay and then mound it with nice topsoil, and then I get over that some mulch. So it's called the lasagna method, but that's just one example of how we can modify planting quality and specifications depending on the site conditions. Site preparation methods. So for all of our sites, we mow them before they're planted. That's very critical. It helps the trees, it gives them an advantage over the weeds for the following years, but it's also super helpful in planting proper trees. If you can see the ground and it's easy to work in, then you're more likely to plant trees properly than if it's difficult to maneuver around the area. Another example is, do we need to bring soil amendments in preparation for planting? So if another example of bringing in a soil amendment would be a planting that we had last fall at Vincent Massey Park, where we had brought in topsoil to mix with the really tough clay that's in that area. So we'll do that if the site conditions require. And then again, animal browsing prevention. We do work very hard at this. So we do apply tree guards to trees every fall to protect them from browsing rodents, rabbits that eat the bark over winter. And then we do place fencing and other deer deterrents on the trees throughout the spring and summer. And then signage. I wanted to point that out because these are all interventions related to or working around nature and the environment. But signage, we do have seen some challenges with contractors mowing some trees after they've been planted. So understanding that and providing or placing fence posts along the boundary of our sites is important, and also placing flagging tape on all of our trees so they're visible is super important. It's a shame when we plant trees and they are cut down a year after by someone who's not paying attention. So those are a lot of interventions that we perform, but how do we track that? And how do we track that, and how do we track those activities? So I mentioned this earlier, submitting a tree care report. So this is a report that is found on our website, and it can be filled out by staff and volunteers, and it's used to track any activities, any tree care activities that you do at the site, and we use it to track any observations as well. So if you're not able to participate in a tree planting event or go and weed a site for half an hour, but you do walk your dog along the exterior of their site regularly, you could submit a tree care report and report any observations you see. If you notice that some trees look a little dry, then you could submit that through this report, and then we'll see that, and then we could act to water the trees. So using the system is very important. It's like a structured way to collect data for all of our sites, and we use it for a lot of the figures that you'll see later on in this presentation. So it helps us make more precise and accurate decisions for interventions, and helps us identify trends more accurately. It's also much faster or quicker when addressing these issues. So there's a very quick response time. If FCF staff plans to visit the sites every few weeks, but if a tree care report is submitted by a volunteer or someone who's passing by, notice that something's not right, then we can respond to that concern immediately and respond to that issue much quicker. So that will have a large impact on how the trees survive. And ultimately, this will help us link our actions and our interventions to survival rates and project success. So this is one of, I don't know, the greatest tools for data collection that we have. It's super important. I think, Leanne, if you could put a link to that page from the website in the chat, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's in the chat now.
Thank you. So next, I want to share a little bit about some stories about volunteer impact and some observations. So we have a bunch of sites along the Aviation Parkway. So if you notice on the map in the east of Ottawa, we have about 4 sites, and they've all been planted incrementally for the past 3 years. So since 2022 all the way to 2024. This is a perfect location to share or measure or investigate the impact of volunteers on our survival rates. As all of the site conditions are exactly the same, the only thing that differs is how much volunteer stewardship there was between the sites. So our first site was planted in 2022, and we were aware that we needed to provide weeding for this site, but it was shocking how much burdock and other invasive, burdock's not invasive, but other species and weeds have grown in and taken over the site and completely shaded all the trees from the sun. So that was a challenge for FCF staff to maintain. And we had a relatively low amount of volunteer effort or volunteer support at that site at that time. And as a result, we saw a survival rate of 64% after 1 year. And then a year later, we planted a section further south of the first site. And all the same conditions, but in this time we mobilized more volunteers, and we were able to have regular tree care events with a decent turnout. And those weeding efforts were much, we got a lot more done on those tree care days. So as a result, the burdock and the weed competition was much lower. And after 1 year since planting, we saw a survival rate of 90% at that site. So in addition to more trees living, we saw an increase in plant health and higher growth rates. So I wanted to point out that these tree care events with volunteers are so important to these sites. These trees need to be maintained and monitored over the 3 to 5 years. And those events are having a positive impact on those urban forests. So next I wanted to share a quote, and I really like this quote because it really emphasizes that stewardship makes a difference each and every time you go out to the site. So every time you remove weeds, vines, burdock from around the trees, you immensely increase the likelihood of those trees surviving to maturity and contributing to the overall health of the forest. So next I wanted to talk about survival rates over time and then eventually our target survival rate. So our organization is relatively small, but we're growing our efforts to track the different interventions that have an impact on success of our sites. And one of them is volunteer stewardship. And we've seen a consistent growth in volunteer stewardship over the past 3 years, most notably at our Aviation Parkway location. So what's interesting about this is that there's been a group of people that have, a group of volunteers that have been mobilized and they've mobilized and they help provide regular tree care maintenance for these sites. They've it's really become sort of like a social event for that site there. So what we're trying to do is improve those numbers or improve the experience and have groups like that for all of our sites. So I guess one of our goals this year is to reduce that gap between Aviation Parkway and the other sites. So I wanted to show that consistent growth in volunteer stewardship. And then the next chart here is a scattered plot of survival rates for these sites. So each color of the dots represents a different location, and each dot represents a different site. So in 2022, we had one site at Hogsback Park, and the survival rate was 65%, 64%. And then the following year, we had another site at Hogsback, which performed much better. So you'll see that there's a trend of increasing survival rates over the past few years. And we can attribute that to the increase in volunteer stewardship, especially at Aviation Parkway. So Aviation Parkway is noted by the blue dots there. So you'll see 64% here, and then well over this 85% target and into 90% and higher. So we can attribute this increase in survival rates from volunteer stewardship, but also some of the other lessons learned from those earlier sites. So we're using all of this, and we're actually tracking the effects of all of our interventions, and it's improving. Last thing I wanted to mention was an 85% target for our survival rates. So we are putting a lot of effort into stewardship, and it's one of the main parts of our mission. So we do value that very much. And so with that, we want to set a target that is above the industry standard. So 85% would be above. So we really strive to achieve high survival rates and high project success. Okay,